This is Inclarity Podcast. I'm RJ Starr. You've probably seen it. Maybe you've done it. Someone launches into a long, emotionally charged complaint. But as you listen, something feels off. They're angry, yes. Frustrated, sure. But the intensity doesn't quite match the context. And the purpose doesn't seem to be resolution. What you're watching isn't catharsis. It's a performance. Welcome to the phenomenon of performance complaining, a behavior that looks like emotional venting, but functions more like emotional theater. Let's say someone goes on a rant about their boss. It's dramatic, it's loaded with exaggerated expressions of injustice, and it's delivered to an audience of coworkers who nod in rhythmic agreement. At first glance, it might look like a normal venting session, people letting off steam. But underneath, the purpose isn't actually to process emotion. It's to reinforce an identity, to claim moral high ground, to bond through shared grievance, and to perform belonging within a group. We all know what real venting looks like. It's messy, vulnerable, often a little confusing. It doesn't always have a clear moral arc. You might even contradict yourself. Because when you're genuinely trying to work through a feeling, you're not trying to win. You're trying to understand. But performance complaining isn't like that. It's clean, it's rehearsed, and most importantly, it's calibrated for effect, not clarity. This behavior has become more common in environments where moral identity is currency. Academic settings, activist spaces, nonprofits, and yes, even corporate teams that brand themselves as values-driven. In these spaces, there's often a subtle pressure to demonstrate not just what you think, but how good you are. And one of the fastest ways to do that is to complain in ways that make you look morally enlightened. I just can't believe people don't care about equity. I'm so exhausted by how no one thinks critically anymore. It's honestly disgusting how some people still support that. These aren't just statements of feeling. They're performances of identity. And they're designed to provoke social alignment, not emotional insight. What you're witnessing is a complaint as a cue, an invitation to signal shared values, shared outrage, shared moral superiority. There's also a strategic advantage to performance complaining. If you voice dissatisfaction through the lens of moral concern, it makes your grievance harder to challenge. Because now, if someone disagrees with you, they're not just disagreeing with your feelings. They're disagreeing with your morality. And yet, this dynamic isn't always conscious. Most people aren't scheming to manipulate a room. What's more common is unconscious mimicry. You see how others around you express frustration, and you start mirroring the style, tone, and framing of those complaints because that's what earns nods, likes, and safety. Over time, people learn which kinds of emotions are socially rewarding, and they perform them over and over until the line between real and performative starts to blur. But here's the cost. Performance complaining displaces actual emotion. If you keep repackaging your anger, confusion, grief, or resentment into neat little statements designed to win approval, you lose contact with what you're really feeling. Your complaints get louder, but your insight gets quieter. And slowly, you stop knowing what's yours and what's borrowed from the people around you. This is especially damaging in environments that pride themselves on being emotionally intelligent, because when everyone is busy being on brand with their outrage, no one is asking the deeper questions. No one is admitting their ambivalence. No one is taking responsibility for their part in the dynamic, and no one is actually metabolizing their experience. Let's talk psychology for a moment. What drives performance complaining is often a blend of emotional avoidance and social reward conditioning. On the emotional side, many people find it easier to externalize than to introspect. Complaining about someone else's failures feels safer than confronting our own confusion, powerlessness, or regret. On the social side, we're wired to seek belonging, and complaining as a group ritual is one of the oldest ways humans create bonds. Anthropologically, communal grievance served an important role. It helped groups form alliances, build consensus, and define boundaries between us and them. But in a modern context, especially one saturated with social media, micropolitics, and identity signaling, grievance has become stylized. It's not just that we share a complaint, It's that we craft it to be legible, strategic, and affirming of the right values. And once that dynamic sets in, emotional honesty becomes risky, because now the goal isn't to be whole, it's to be right. What does that do to a person over time? It can create emotional rigidity the more you perform certain emotional tones, like righteous anger or jaded superiority. The harder it becomes to access other tones, like softness, vulnerability, or confusion. You become over-identified with your stance, and that over-identification is what keeps the performance running. There's a phrase in social psychology called attitude crystallization. It refers to the process by which your attitudes become more extreme and inflexible the more you publicly express them, especially in front of others who agree. Performance complaining speeds up this crystallization, because every time you perform a moralized complaint and get rewarded, you double down on that identity. You're no longer just someone who's frustrated, you're someone who's always right to be frustrated. And that makes the idea of change, or even internal reflection, feel like a threat to your social position. So how do you know if you're venting or performing? Ask yourself, am I seeking understanding or seeking validation? Am I exaggerating this feeling to get a particular response? Would I still say this if no one were listening? Do I feel closer to resolution or more committed to my grievance after I talk about it? If your answer leans toward performance, that doesn't make you bad. It makes you human. But it's worth noticing, because the longer you live in performative modes of communication, the more you lose access to your own psychological complexity. Here's the deeper truth. Most real emotions aren't easily tweetable. They're not symmetrical. They don't always align with your politics. They don't always make you look good. Sometimes you're the problem. Sometimes you're unsure. Sometimes you're not actually angry. You're just sad and too defended to say it. And that's what makes real emotional processing so powerful. It asks you to be honest with yourself, even if it costs you something socially. Especially if it costs you something socially. So the next time you find yourself about to vent, pause. Ask what you actually want. Do you want connection? Relief? Clarity? If so, let yourself be messy. Be unsure. Be real. Not everything has to signal your alignment. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is say something that doesn't win applause. Emotional integrity isn't always loud, but it's always honest. And honesty, not performance, is what keeps us psychologically whole. This is Inclarity Podcast. I'm RJ Starr.